Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin story. This is Charlie Crimebuster, and we're going to be talking about that right here on today's program. So stay tuned for a look at Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin story. Well, hello and welcome to the Charlie Crimebuster Show. We're going to be talking on Crime Talk today about the new documentary, Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin story. Actually premiered July the 30th, 2018, which was last night as we do this broadcast. And we're going to be on the record about it because we want to talk about what you heard there and saw there and what is true and what may not be total to the truth or maybe distorted truth, or we're just going to talk about the episode and what we saw and how we interpreted it. We're glad to have you with us today. By the way, let me say at the very onset of this, this was a documentary. It actually was broadcast last night on Paramount Network. There's going to be 6 different episodes of this, and all of them have a different approach to it. Last night was Stand Your Ground, the Florida Stand Your Ground law. The last week's episode we covered that a little more in detail, the Stand Your Ground law, that is, not the episode. So last night's title was Stand Your Ground. Coming up next week, The Elephant in the Room, Justice for George, The Burden of Proof, Reasonable Doubt, and then I think there's one more that we'll get to a little later. But let me just say at the very beginning, my heart goes out to both parents of Trayvon Martin. I just cannot imagine what they're going through or what they have gone through. I have respect for them. I have sympathy for them. The truth is, this did not have to happen. I wish that Trayvon Martin was alive. I wish his family could have the joy of watching their son turn into a man. And I've got to say, right off the bat, folks, Zimmerman is not without fault in this whole situation. But the question is this: is he guilty of murder? And did the prosecution prove it without reasonable doubt? You see, in this country, in America, there's a difference between being innocent and not guilty. You see, our courts are based on guilty or not guilty, not necessarily on being innocent. And Zimmerman certainly made some mistakes, some costly mistakes that cost a young man his life. That in mind, we're going to be looking at the episode, and I'm going to give you, just in a nutshell, I'm going to give you what I saw last night. The impact, the emotional impact was tremendous. You could not help but feel for the family of Trayvon Martin. You could not help put yourself in that place as a parent, how you would feel. And I thought they did that very, very well as they brought that to our attention. But here is the nutshell. This is what I found the episode was all about. It was big on emotion, but it was small in evidence. It was little in evidence. And in order to understand that, you have to go back and look at the origin of this series. On March the 23rd, in 2017, there was an announcement that the Weinstein Company and Jay-Z had won a heated bidding war for the screen rights to 2 books. This is basically based on 2 books, one called Suspicious Nation, The Inside Story of the Trayvon Martin Injustice, and Why We Continue to Repeat It. That was by Lisa Bloom. The other book was Rest in Power, The Enduring Life of Trayvon Martin, by Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, parents. Now, the producer's plan was to reportedly take the movies, adapt them into 2 separate projects. One was a 6-part documentary television series, and then a narrative or a feature film. Other studios had been involved in trying to get the screen rights. One was Fox Searchlight, the other Universal Pictures. They had been attempting to obtain them for Will Packer and Ted Field. But it was the Weinstein Company, Harvey Weinstein, David Glasser. It was back during the weekend of the Academy Award, there in their Los Angeles office, along with Jay-Z and Martin's parents. Now, the pair was able to win them over, now get this, by making it very clear that their greatest concern was seeing Martin's life and legacy honored. Now listen to that. Their concern to produce this was to see that Martin's life and legacy was honored. And so on April the 6th, 2017, it was then announced that the Paramount Network had been given a series orders to the production, which is now titled Rest in Power, the Trayvon Martin Story. Hey, on a little side note, around October the 9th, 2017, it was announced that following the reports of sexual abuse allegations against producer Harvey Weinstein, that his name would be removed from the series credits, as would the Weinstein Company as well. That's just a side note. But keep in mind, you've got to realize what the origin of the series is. The origin of the series is not necessarily justice. The origin of the series is not necessarily what happened in the courtroom. The origin of the series is to honor the life of Trayvon Martin. And by that being the origin, the reason for the series, you've got to look at that series with that in mind. And they're doing a very good job at honoring Trayvon Martin in this series. So you got to look at the origin of the series and realize that that's why the series is here. And if you're looking for something that would honor Trayvon Martin, you're going to see that there. But what about the focus of the series? I found that throughout the documentary last night there was confusing and incorrect comparisons. Let me give you this quote. Back in April the 20th at the Tribeca Film Festival, there was a Q&A portion following the first episode. Jennifer First, she says this, now quote, she said, we actually chose not to show a lot of the images that were shown in the courtroom that Tracy and Sabrina had to sit through because there's no need to see those again. And I agree, you don't want to put something necessarily that's painful to the parents on there. But you got to keep in mind that I'm concerned that not only are they staying away from the images in the courtroom, more importantly, they seem to be staying away from the evidence in the courtroom. They seem to want to stay away from the courtroom at all, and there's a reason for that, because I want you to listen to the rest of the quote here, and then you're going to understand why this particular episode did not dive into any of the evidence, real evidence, as far as that goes in the particular episode. She said, it's been very difficult, but it's a tragedy worth telling. And she goes on to say, because it happened to Emmett Till. Nobody was held accountable, said Fulton. Now, who's Emmett Till? Well, Emmett Till, now get this, is the name of a 14-year-old boy that was lynched in Mississippi in 1955. 1955. A young 14-year-old boy lynched in Mississippi. Now, here's my problem. How in the world can you compare what happened in Mississippi in 1955 when this 14-year-old boy was lynched? How can you compare that to a trial, a jury of 6 women, 1 African American on the jury, 2 Hispanics on the jury, and a courtroom situation that happened 6 years ago today, 2012? How can you compare what happened in 2012 to where the country was in 1955 in Mississippi? That's an unfair comparison. There's no comparison there, folks. You see, in the courtroom, evidence is produced. In a courtroom, evidence can be refuted. Evidence can be cross-examined. Eyewitnesses can be cross-examined. There was a trial, and it was a fair trial. How can you say what happened in 2012 in Sanford, Florida, can be compared to what happened in 1955 in Mississippi with a 14-year-old young man being lynched? It's just not a fair comparison, folks. Not a fair comparison at all. And speaking of unfair images, it was really interesting in the episode last night that oftentimes we saw Trayvon Martin as a youngster. We saw him on the football field. We saw him many years younger than what he was at 17 years of age. And we saw those images over and over again. And I get it. The idea is to honor Trayvon Martin. The idea is to show the emotional attachment to the family. And it did have an impact. And they have every right to do that. But in the same episode, the pictures you saw of George Zimmerman, well, they were mostly those of post-trial, those after the trial, when for some reason, and I guess he got bitter, and he did what I call totally rogue. So they showed that image of him sitting there with a cigar in his mouth, and him sitting there with a rebel flag behind him, and him sitting there, you going to the gun range. You know, they showed all these images when he really went what I call rogue after the trial. Not the pre-incident pictures. They did show pictures of him that night when he was arrested and brought in there, and you could see that his face was bloody. You could see that his back of his head had been injured. You know, you could see that he had been in a fight. Looked like he got the worst end of the fight, although we know he didn't, because this young man was shot dead, and that's terrible. But still, it showed him in the fight. That they showed that, but the other images of him was all, post. It was all after the fact when he went rogue. And so I'm not sure that those images were really fair. But again, the purpose is not to be fair. The purpose is to honor Trayvon Martin. Keep that in mind throughout the entire series. You're going to see this. So there was unfair images. Now, I will say this. They were very fair in that they brought up the past of both of these folks, both Zimmerman and Trayvon, you see. Trayvon's past was mentioned. Even back during the trial, Judge Deborah Nelson, she made it clear that she denied several motions by Zimmerman attorney Mark O'Mara to introduce the 17-year-old suspension from school. Actually, he was here in Sanford. He was in Sanford, Florida, because of the fact that he was suspended from school. His past marijuana use and his participation in fights. He had several fights that he had participated in. So those were past prior acts. And they did mention that, they mentioned it this way, that he was a teenage boy. He did things that teenage boys do. He did things that youngsters do. He got in trouble like youngsters do. They also mentioned the past of Zimmerman, because in July of 2005, he was arrested for resisting an officer with violence. This neighborhood watch volunteer wanted to be a cop. He got into a scuffle with cops who were questioning a friend for alleged underage drinking. Now, these charges were reduced and then waived after he entered an alcohol education program. So they did not mention the fact that the charges were dropped. They just mentioned the fact that he was arrested on the episode last night. And that's true. So they showed past prior acts of both Zimmerman and past prior acts they referred to of Trayvon Martin. The point of the matter is this. Those past acts does not necessarily say what happened that night. What happened on that rainy night in Sanford, Florida, when that altercation took place. Those past acts do not say what happened then. So keep in mind on that as far as both. Also, I thought it was very unfair the way they inserted the Stand Your Ground law. After all, this episode was called Stand Your Ground. It's as though that Zimmerman's defense was totally based on Stand Your Ground. It was not, folks. You see? Even the lawyers for Zimmerman will tell you. You see, the Florida law passed in 2006, it basically says people who feel threatened don't have to retreat from danger, no matter where they are. In other words, if you're leaving the shopping center late at night going to your car and somebody confronts you, you don't have an obligation to retreat. You don't have to run from that. You can defend yourself. Now, they do say that this became a huge point of contention after Zimmerman's arrest. Supporters saying the incident demonstrated the precise need for law, and the critics saying it encourages a Wild West mentality. Now, Zimmerman's lawyers, they said, hey, it just doesn't apply. You see, George did not have an ability to retreat because he was on the ground with Trayvon Martin mounting him, striking blows. Therefore, the Stand Your Ground benefit given by the statute simply just does not apply to the facts of George's case. It's traditional self-defense. That's what Zimmerman's attorney said, traditional self-defense. And that's exactly what they used as a defense, and that's the defense that won the trial. It's interesting to note, though, the police chief, he was featured there. Unfortunately for the police chief, it was not a happy story for him. Not only was a young life lost, he did lose his job. Not to be compared to a life, but still, it was bad news for the police chief because he thought because of the self-defense part of this that he could not prove that Zimmerman did not act in self-defense. And so they alleged, or they chose not to prosecute. Now, there's another situation happening in Pinellas County right now. where the same thing is taking place. In fact, Sheriff had a news conference on the day of this broadcast and mentioned that the stand your ground law does not, would not allow them to arrest this particular person, that the person had the right to defend themselves and had the right not to retreat. And of course, as here, there is the racial tension. But would it interest you to note that racial disparity is not shown in Florida? In fact, in 2012, in very response to the Trayvon Martin case, the Tampa Bay Times compiled a report on the application of the Stand Your Ground law. They created a database of cases where defendants sought to invoke the law. Now, here's what the report says. No racial disparity. No racial disparity in Florida cases in the way in which defendants claiming self-defense under the law are treated. White subjects being charged and convicted at the same rate as black subjects, and as a result of mixed race cases, which were similar to both white victims of black attackers and black victims of white attackers. You see, it simply says the fact of the matter is that there's no racial disparity. Stand Your Ground protects both white and black. In fact, it's interesting, in the news conference, the sheriff in Pinellas County stated there were two other situations. When he was asked, is this racial? He said, of course not. It's not racial. It is not. No way this is racial. He said there were two other situations where two white people both were charged, but the prosecutor in Pinellas County chose not to prosecute because of the Stand Your Ground law. So he has arrested white people for the same thing. Yet the evidence in those situations was overturned by Stand Your Ground. So it's not this, this idea that this is all racial. It's not all racial, according to the evidence. Now, here's the bottom line, though, when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it. On the episode last night, you heard both parents, both father and mother, said that the voice on the tape yelling for help was Trayvon Martin. What they did not point out, that just 2 days after the fatal confrontation, Tracy, his father, Trayvon's father, went to Sanford Florida Police Department for an update, and there an investigator played him a tape. It contained the crack of the final gunshot. It also contained the voice calling out for help. And as I best recall, after he played the tape, the detective said that Trayvon Martin's father, Tracy, said to him, do you recognize the voice? And Martin says that his response was, this is what Martin says. Martin says, I didn't tell him no, that wasn't Trayvon. He said the chairs had wheels on them, and I kind of pushed away from the table, just shook my head and said, I can't tell. I never said no, that wasn't my son's voice. But two police officers say he definitely said no, that was not Trayvon's voice. So later, after hearing the tape weeks later in Sanford, Florida, there in the mayor's office, he said, I knew that it was Trayvon's voice. But at first, he did not know it was Trayvon's voice and said, according to two others, that it was not his voice. So here's what it boils down. The person yelling for help, of course, it's considered the person yelling for help was the person on bottom in that fight. Who was it? Was it Zimmerman or was it Martin? Well, there are two things that you need to look at. Two eyewitnesses called by the prosecution said definitely it was George Zimmerman on the bottom. One guy by the name of John Good. He saw him out there, and he said he testified what he believed to be Martin on top of Zimmerman. The color of the top was dark, and the color at the bottom was red, referring to the men's clothing. At another point, he told the court that the person on the bottom had lighter skin color. Zimmerman, of course, was a white Hispanic who was wearing a red and black jacket that night. Martin, who was black, was wearing a dark sweatshirt. The person on the bottom, I could hear the guy yelling, help. Under cross-examination, Good said he believes he saw Martin on top punching Zimmerman, get this, MMA style, which is a reference to martial arts. The person on top of the ground was pounding the person on the bottom. And Good said correct. Another guy, another witness there said that that he saw Zimmerman immediately afterwards, and that Zimmerman had said that he was on the bottom. But here's what I think is the real critical part. Police officer Tim Smith told the court when he took Zimmerman into custody on the night of the shooting, get this, that the back of Zimmerman's jacket was wet and had bits of grass on it, and the back of his pants appeared wet. Now, how did he get grass on the back of his jacket, and how did he get a wet jacket in the back of his pants if he was not the person on the ground? So does that make sense? The other thing is, they had experts came in and did testify at the trial, according to where the shots were on Trayvon Martin and how they followed that on his clothing, that it would support the fact that it was Zimmerman on the ground yelling for help. Well, that really is a smoking gun right there. Evidence appears to show that it was Zimmerman on the ground, not Trayvon Martin. So Trayvon Martin's parents says that was the voice of Trayvon Martin. Zimmerman's parents says that was his voice. The evidence leads to support that it was Zimmerman on the ground. And if at that point Zimmerman felt his life was in danger, and he did say in his testimony that he felt his life was in danger of severe bodily harm or death, and he also says that he thought that Trayvon Martin saw his gun and was trying to reach for his gun, and so that he shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense. That's what the evidence says. Well, it's going to get interesting out there, folks. It really is going to get interesting. So I want to encourage you to join with us as we again discuss this particular episode. And here is the lessons that we learn. First of all, my whole summary of the episode is this: high in emotion, small in evidence. But here's the lesson that we learn. Number one, the tragedy should not have occurred. That's right, it should not have occurred. If you see something, say something. Be a good witness. Point it out to the police. But do not involve yourself where you do not have the training. A trained police officer would have handled that situation totally different than Zimmerman did, I can guarantee you. Number two, avoid confrontation, especially if you're a concealed weapon carrier. You know, most of the people, now hear me, most of the people that I know, and there are millions, who are concealed carriers, they are people who understand how very important it is to stay out of confrontations. You don't go around looking for confrontations because you hope and pray that you never have to use that weapon to protect your life or someone else's. You just hope and pray that that never happens, and you're not going to insert yourself into a situation where that could be escalated to the point that you would do that. There's just no reason to do that. That's why, road rage. If you're a concealed weapon carrier, don't you ever participate in road rage. Don't you engage it. Don't you try to get involved in it. And if it comes to you, get away from it, because there is no good that's going to come from a road rage incident with a concealed carrier. So just don't do it. If you are a person who engages in road rage, then I don't know that you should be carrying a weapon. I really don't know that, friend, because people who carry weapons should be of sound mind. They should be emotionally strong, and they should recognize that a confrontation can lead to a deadly confrontation, and you do not want that to happen if at all possible. Number three, remember, you're going to be tried on the evidence, friend. You're going to be tried on the evidence, so make sure that the evidence always shows that you have the right to defend yourself, but make sure the evidence will show that, because that's exactly what happened in this case. Well, this is Charlie Crimebuster, and we've been discussing the very first episode of Stand Your Ground episode, the Trayvon Martin story, and particularly this one, a whole series called Rest in Power. Next week's going to be The Elephant in the Room, and we're going to take a look at it, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about racial divide, which is certainly real in this country. Until this time next time, Charlie Crimebuster reminding you to be safe, because the life you save, it may be your very own.